Hi, everyone.
Hello. We have reached Matthew 5, the beginning of the so-called Sermon on the Mount. And we're going to read verses 1 to 12 in the NIV.
Now when he saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you.
Now on this, J.C. Ryle comments as follows. The 3 chapters which begin with these verses deserve the special attention of all readers of the Bible. They contain what is commonly called the Sermon on the Mount. Every word of the Lord Jesus ought to be most precious to professing Christians. It is the voice of the chief shepherd. It is the charge of the great bishop and head of the church. It is the master speaking. It is the word of him who spake as never man spake, and by whom we shall all be judged at the last day. Would we know what kind of people Christians ought to be? Would we know the character at which Christians ought to aim? Would we know the outward walk and inward habit of mind which become a follower of Jesus? Then let us often study the Sermon on the Mount. Let us ponder each sentence and prove ourselves by it. Not least, let us often consider who they are that are called blessed at the beginning of the sermon. Those whom the great high priest blesses are blessed indeed. The Lord Jesus calls those blessed who are poor in spirit. He means the humble, the lowly-minded, the self-abased. He means those who are deeply convinced of their own sinfulness in God's sight. These are they who are not wise in their own eyes and holy in their own sight. They are not rich and increased with goods. They do not fancy they need nothing. They regard themselves as wretched and miserable and poor and blind and naked. Blessed are all such. Humility is the very first letter in the alphabet of Christianity. We must begin low if we would build high. Well, that strikes me.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
The poor in spirit. Now, I don't know if we would have thought that's the definition of the poor in spirit. It's the very first thing he says in the Sermon on the Mount. But as Jehovah's Witnesses, were we like this? Humble, lowly-minded, self-abased, convinced of our own sinfulness in God's sight? Or you've often talked about the Luke passage where the 2 men go up to the temple.
And the one is proud of all his efforts to please God, and then he looks at the sinner, the tax collector, with such, well, I'm glad I'm not him.
Disdain.
But I think the longer you're in the witnesses, the more if you are one of the ones that are trying really hard to do everything that the Watchtower says, the more you are inclined to be prideful, and to think that somehow now you've achieved it and God owes you.
So not only do you not regard anyone outside the organization as worthy of God's ultimate blessing, but even those within the congregation you tend to look, shall we say, askance at, if not, and even view them as we're being told is commonly happening now as well. We used to think they were weak and maybe even reach out to them, but it sounds to me like right now they're being shunned.
Oh, yeah.
It seems to be getting more judgmental even within the organization. So people who used to be viewed perhaps as bad associations. You wouldn't want to hang out with them.
I think one of the things that struck me the most when I first started meeting Christians, and we had started a little bookstore out of our living room, so it was not that many that I met initially, but I did notice how humble these people were. And they were not pushing the things I thought they would be pushing. You know, I'm relating it to everything that I'd just come out of. But they didn't push that they had all truth, that they were the right ones, and that we should go where they're going. They were very humble and kind and self-aware. You know,
Yeah.
they were not claiming they were superior. And they didn't give off that vibe either.
Well,
They were superior.
I think that comes from the stress in Christianity upon grace.
Yeah.
Whereas in the Watchtower, you give lip service to undeserved kindness, but you really don't mean it. Everything that God blesses you with is because, well, you're exemplary.
You would hear them say things like, well, Christ came for sinners. That's why I'm here. You know, there was no shame in talking even about the things you were struggling with. Whereas I think in the witnesses, you'd have to hide anything you were struggling with.
To keep up the illusion of God's pure organization.
Yeah, because they have to be presenting themselves as corporately clean and personally clean. So if you did have something you were struggling with, you better struggle alone, or you're going to be kicked out.
I like that sentence. Humility is the very first letter in the alphabet of Christianity. We must begin low if we would build high.
The Lord Jesus called those blessed who mourn. He means those who sorrow for sin and grieve daily over their own shortcomings. These are they who trouble themselves more about sin than about anything on earth. The remembrance of it is grievous to them. The burden of it is intolerable. Blessed are all such. The sacrifices of God are a broken and contrite spirit. One day they shall weep no more. They shall be comforted. The Lord Jesus called those blessed who are meek. He means those who are of a patient and contented spirit. They are willing to put up with little honor here below. They can bear injuries without resentment. They are not ready to take offense. Like Lazarus in the parable, they are content to wait for their good things. Blessed are all such. They are never losers in the long run. One day they shall reign on the earth. The Lord Jesus called those blessed who hunger and thirst after righteousness. He means those who desire above all things to be entirely conformed to the mind of God. They long not so much to be rich or wealthy or learned as to be holy. Blessed are all such. They shall have enough one day. They shall awake up after God's likeness and be satisfied.
The Lord Jesus calls those blessed who are merciful. He means those who are full of compassion toward others. They pity all who are suffering either from sin or sorrow and are tenderly desirous to make their sufferings less. They're full of good works and endeavors to do good. Blessed are all such, both in this life and that to come. They shall reap a rich reward. The Lord Jesus calls those blessed who are pure in heart. He means those who do not aim merely at outward correctness, but at inward holiness. They are not satisfied with a mere external show of religion. They strive to keep a heart and conscience void of offense, and to serve God with the spirit and the inner man. Blessed are all such. The heart is the man. A man looketh upon the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. 1 Samuel 16, verse 7. He that is most spiritual minded will have the most communion with God. The Lord Jesus calls those blessed who are peacemakers. He means those who use all their influence to promote peace and charity on earth, in private and in public, at home and abroad. He means those who strive to make all men love one another by teaching that that gospel which says love is the fulfilling of the law. Blessed are all such. They are doing the very work which the Son of God began when he came to earth the first time, and which he will finish when he returns the second time.
Lastly, the Lord Jesus calls those blessed who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. He means those who are laughed at, mocked, despised, and ill-used because they endeavor to live as true Christians. Blessed are all such. They drink of the same cup which their Master drank. They are now confessing him before men, and he will confess them before his Father and the angels at the last day. Great is their reward. Such are the 8 foundation stones which the Lord lays down at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. 8 great testing truths are placed before us. May we mark well each one of them and learn wisdom. Let us learn how entirely contrary are the principles of Christ to the principles of the world. It is vain to deny it. They are almost diametrically opposed. The very character which the Lord Jesus praises, the world despises. The very pride and thoughtlessness and high tempers and worldliness and selfishness and formality and unlovingness which abound everywhere, the Lord Jesus condemns. Let us learn how unhappily different is the teaching of Christ from the practice of many professing Christians. Where shall we find men and women among those who go to churches and chapels who are striving to live up to the pattern we have read today? Alas, there is much reason to fear that many baptized persons are utterly ignorant of what the New Testament contains. Above all, let us learn how holy and spiritual-minded all believers should be. They should never aim at any standard lower than that of the Sermon on the Mount. Christianity is eminently a practical religion. Sound doctrine is its root and foundation, but holy living should always be its fruit. And if we would know what holy living is, let us often bethink ourselves who they are that Jesus called blessed.
The 8 beatitudes. The fact that he has to lament their absence, the absence of these thoughts even, let alone characteristics from a great many Christians in his own day. That's 170 or so years ago. But today we need to think about this, it seems to me, a lot more profoundly than even in those days, because most people aren't even professedly Christian nowadays. And in the cults, we well know ourselves that the spirit of the accuser of the brethren is alive and well in the Watchtower, for instance. And that spirit is also very much alive in our culture. Yeah. We're not aware of our own sins. We're only interested in the sins of others. So the blame game is more intense now than it even was, I would say, 10 or 15 years ago.
This rights, fighting for rights, we can easily slip into that. Even as Christians, we can slip into that. Because it sounds right, that you should fight for your rights.
You can hide behind the word justice.
Yeah.
But if it's about you and not about...
It's not being...
Not about... humble. Not even the rights of others, but rather... Well, I guess it is the spirit of slander is growing in our culture. We know the spirit of slander is in the cults. And that you can only make yourself look good and feel justified by criticizing those exterior to yourself.
The tendency is when you're looking at your rights, you're not looking at other people's rights. So that's not a characteristic that we'd want to develop, something that makes us self-centered. rather than outward looking.
All Ryle points to the solution is to meditate upon these things constantly, daily. And then you'll be aware how far you fall short of the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah.
And we'd be in a better position to help others to deal with the culture around them. But the spirit of the world is in the church. It was then, it is now.
We need to be self-aware. And the more you are self-aware, I think the idea, I remember reading the idea that as Christians grow, they get smaller. You know, which
Nice image.
I like that image. It reminds me of Lewis Carroll. Is it Lewis Carroll? Yeah.
Alice.
Yeah, about the eating and getting smaller. And
I'm going to put on your screen a video we did on the characteristic of the cults, the 5 characteristics of cultic groups, and one of them is slander. So I'll put that on your screen. And J.C. Ryle continues his discussion of the Sermon on the Mount next time.